Well, good afternoon, good evening, maybe even good morning. Today's Saturday, May the 17th, and we're getting ready for another Lord's Day. And I'm one step closer, one day closer to seeing, 1 week closer to seeing many of you. In part of my daily regiment, I try to spend some time devotionally in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I'm reading right now in the book of Micah. Micah's directly after Jonah, a little unusual book that whenever you start to consider what's going on, he's born and raised in a time that the kings finally wake up. Ahaz is evil, Hezekiah is good. The kingdom is divided, and Samaria and Jerusalem are far from God. Kind of like part of our world today. It's a critical time, and God's going to bring judgment. But about Micah 1:2, Micah begins to tell the people of the impending judgment, and he gives it as a word from the Lord. In fact, for all practical purposes, God has been extremely silent for quite a while. In fact, his word contains a warning to the people of Jerusalem and Samaria that God is going to bring severe judgment because of their sin. You see, he tells them that their high places and their idolatrous temples are going to be destroyed. And before we pass judgment, we'd better check what we idolize. You see, this caused the prophet Micah to mourn deeply. In fact, he was ashamed because what was going on in Jerusalem, the city of God, and Samaria, a blessed area of the kingdom, was just the opposite of what was going on in some of the surrounding territories. In some of the surrounding territories, they were experiencing revival. God had spoken, the people had repented, turned to God, and God moved and blessed them. In fact, the nations truly needed God in a bad way. And when they called out to him, guess what? God always shows up. In fact, the problem that Micah had, that in the passage of scripture in verses 2 and beyond, people would scheme and how to cheat and steal from their neighbors. They would go to bed at night thinking how they could overcome people first thing in the morning. They didn't want to hear the truth of the prophets of God. They only wanted to listen to the false prophets. And in the middle of their sin and failure, it's a surprising read. And this is what I want you to get. I know you're hearing me today and you're saying, thank you, Captain Positive. Keep listening for just a moment. In the middle of all this judgment, in the middle of all of this separate scheming and conniving, in the middle of all of this sin, there's the mercy and grace of God. In fact, God promises restoration in verses 12 and 13 of chapter 1. Of course, God had made some unconditional promises to the nation of Israel, and he is the God of grace and mercy. But it's still amazing to consider that God would bless and be good to those who would sin against him so seriously. You see, we certainly serve a wonderful and gracious God. Despite our sin, despite our failure, he offers forgiveness and restoration to those who trust in him. For those who are far away from God, our FFGs, I call them, he promises to draw near to us if we admit our sin and believe in him. Therein lies the question. Are you ready to step away from what's not working and step toward a God who promises complete and utter restoration? The choice is ours.